If this is your first DUI in the state of Indiana, your first question is probably, am I going to go to jail over this? And like many other things in life, the answer is, it depends. Now, initially, when you are pulled over, arrested, what have you, you are probably going to go to jail for a period of time until you either are released on your own recognizance, if there's a bond that's been set in place and you pay that, or if you go in front of a judge and the judge releases you. And the question we always get is, am I going to go back to jail? And it depends. It depends on how high your blood alcohol concentration was. Was there a crash? Were there children involved? Do you have a history of alcohol or substance abuse related charges? There's just a grand amount of things that go into whether or not you're going to go back to jail. But typically in Indiana, if it's your first time getting a DUI, or in Indiana as we call them, OVWIs, you are not going to go back to jail. But again, a lot of it depends on certain circumstances and even the county that you're in. In Marion County, you're unlikely to go to jail over your first DUI arrest. But other counties such as Morgan County, even if it's your first offense, there was no crash, you didn't have a high blood alcohol concentration, they're still going to be looking for anywhere between 3 to 7 days in jail for a first offense. But typically, if this is your first OVWI arrest and there wasn't a significant crash, there wasn't people that were hurt, it was charged as a misdemeanor rather than a felony, you're not going to be going to jail. You're looking at some time on probation. For DUI probation, you're going to be looking at substance abuse evaluation, and then based on that evaluation, they may or may not want you to do classes, a destructive decision panel, maybe some community service, and ultimately just staying out of trouble for a period of time. Now, outside of am I going to jail, the second question that we always get is, how is this going to affect my driver's license? When you're charged with an OVWI in Indiana, the state of Indiana more than likely is going to ask that your driver's license be suspended. And typically, your driver's license will be suspended at your initial hearing, which is your first court hearing in front of the judge after you've been charged with an OVWI. Now, it is very important to get an attorney hired early on in the process because an attorney is going to be the one that's able to keep you driving while the case progresses. And an attorney can keep you driving in two ways. If you're pulled over for a suspected DUI, and an officer ultimately asks you to take a breath test or a blood draw, and you agree to that, then we can keep you driving with specialized driving privileges. Specialized driving privileges is a tool in Indiana where if someone's been arrested and charged with an OVWI, the state asks to suspend the license, we can ask that the court allow you to drive to certain places, which is usually work, school, things of that nature, while the case is progressing. Specialized driving privileges last 180 days, which means that for 180 days while the case is pending, the court can suspend your license, but again, an attorney can keep you driving most of the time with specialized driving privileges. Now, say you were pulled over for a DUI, the officer asks you to take a blood draw, take a breath test, and you say no. That is called a refusal in Indiana. And anytime you refuse a chemical test or a blood draw after the officer reads what's called Indiana implied consent, it is a mandatory 1-year license suspension. Now again, an attorney at your initial hearing would be able to ask the judge that instead of issuing a license suspension based on that refusal, that you be allowed to drive with an ignition interlock device. That's one of those blow devices that get installed in your vehicle. You have to blow into it anytime you start the vehicle, and it's not going to start if there's any sort of alcohol that's detected. So no matter what happens at that initial police encounter, more likely than not, an attorney can keep you driving while the case progresses. But again, that all depends on, was there a crash? Do you have prior OVWIs? What county you're in? But that's why it's always important to get an attorney on board sooner than later, because there are timelines where these things need to be filed. And if you miss these timelines, the reality is that you're going to be left without a driver's license. You're not going to be able to drive while your case is progressing. It's always important to get an attorney on board sooner than later. Now, what changes outcomes in DUI investigations and DUI cases? And a lot of it depends on that initial stop. Did the officer properly stop you for a traffic violation? Did the officer see you driving? Then comes the field sobriety test. Did the officers do these field sobriety tests correctly? There's the HGN test, which is what people commonly refer to as an eye test, although it's not an eye test. Then there is the one-legged stand and the walk and turn. There are lots of steps that go into these, and if the officers don't do them properly, then an attorney can kind of push back against them, because what the officers are doing with these field sobriety tests is they're trying to build the case to show that there's probable cause that you were intoxicated. So if there's ways that the officer didn't do these correctly, then an attorney can kind of go in there and mess up the state's case saying, hey, the officer didn't do this correctly, so that test shouldn't be valid. What does a lawyer do early on in an OVWI case? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to the state. I'm going to be looking for body cam, dash cam, getting the police records, the probable cause affidavit, and then from there, potentially deposing officers, getting them into my office, putting them under oath, and asking them more questions, because a lot of times there's important details that are left out of a police officer's report, and a lot of those details can be good for you. They're not going to put in the good details for you, they're only going to put in the bad. But a lot of this stuff is dependent on how quick can we get started. Getting charged with a DUI can be stressful, even if it's your first time. If you have any questions, if you're facing a DUI charge, please give us at the Marc Lopez Law Firm a phone call, 317-632-3642, and always remember, plead the fifth.